when she asked me to do this, normally I'm not crazy about doing stuff like this. I like to make work, not talk about it as much. It's harder for me to sort of reflect on the work that I'm making, especially while I'm in a mode of productivity. But when Tina asked me, I said, of course, I would do it. And so it forced me to look back on the last sort of 4 or 5 years and think about what I've done and how I've done it and how I approach things. So I'm going to take you through a bit of that.
We're brought up in a culture where you are what you do. People say, tell me about yourself. You immediately go into your career as if that is a complete and perfect definition of what and who you are.
So I don't know if anyone's been at a party and someone asks you your name, they tell you, their name, and then they kind of wait to ask you what you do. And in my experience, I sort of clam up. I don't know how to answer it because, 15 years ago, we were one thing. When I started as a photographer. Not only was I just a photographer, but I had to be a still life photographer who took pictures of sneakers on blue, and anything outside of that no one would consider me for. And no one really was comfortable looking at how I do things. It was what I do. And so we were confined to the medium that we work in. And now so much has changed in the last dozen years that now what we do is really defined on how we look at things and how we approach life and situations, especially in our productive life. So a lot of this defining what we do needs to be looked at how we approach things, not really the medium we look at. So when I thought about what I do, I was able to distill it just in like the last couple of weeks preparing for this into three things. The first thing that I have to do is I have to have a concept. Especially in a collaborative medium like I work in, all the mediums I work in are very collaborative. If you don't have a concept and you don't have a clear thing that you're chasing, you don't know where you're going, and the people you're working with and trying to bring along and get excited about your work, it's really hard unless you have a very clear vision of where you want to, what you're curious about and what you want to chase. So the first thing you need is a concept. And then you need to, what I need to do is to systematically collect and organize the data. I got to come up with a plan for how I'm going to go out and sort of collect all the things I need to make all the possible outlets that I'm going to want to make in the project. And then third, I need to create multiple entry points. Once I've gone out into the world and I've sort of taken video and photographs and text and all the things that I do for the work that I make, I want to be able to make as many possible finished products as possible, because so many different kinds of people engage in different ways with work. Some people like to watch films, some people like to read books, some people go to exhibitions, some people go to blogs, some people go to websites. You never know where people are going to engage with your work, and I'm interested in making as many different touch points and doorways into the work as possible. So I'll start with my first sort of large creative initiative, which was a book called Creature. And the concept for this was to remove all the context from the subject and create sort of a singular environment for all the subject matter to exist in. And I made a number of photographs over a period of a few years of animals out of their environment on white. And what I found interesting about it was that the animals from all different parts of the world, all different scale, all different sort of age groups of the animals, the most varied group of subject could all exist in one space and all of a sudden become equalized. And the white in this project, for the first time, and something that I learned to evolve later on, became this great democratizer and this transportational device. And oftentimes people think of me as someone who makes work on white, but actually white is a consequence. It's not an aesthetic choice. It's really about the absence of space and how I can bring everything into one environment. I can go all over the world. I can photograph in all sorts of environments and bring all of these animals from everywhere together in one space. And what happens is you start to realize that there's a sort of shared consciousness. There's something that happens when you look at all the photographs where they're not just animals living out there unlike us. There's something behind them. There's a consciousness to them that we can share, and we actually become closer, and there's a sort of shared breath between us and the subject. So the white becomes this transportational device, this new environment we create where everyone enters into that's in the project, and then the subject matter becomes easier to ingest for the audience. So the concept was to create the singular environment in this reductive way, but then the approach was to systematically organize and collect all this data, have this system so that I could create different ways of outputting it in all the different media. So the first one was this book, and this was the beginning of a long and really fruitful collaboration I've had with a graphic designer named David Meredith. One of the things he does is graphic design, and he's also an amazing photographer, which helps in our collaboration a lot. And when we approached doing a book for this, the idea was not, let's make a book of these photographs, because to serve that concept, actually, I need to get myself, the authorship, out of the way. I mean, obviously, when you look at it and you say, oh, someone made this, but the reality is that I want you to fall into the work, and a successful reaction from me to the work is not, wow, look at an amazing photograph, but look at that animal, and look how incredible that animal is, or that subject. So the book became this object in and of itself, and we started thinking about not a book of photographs, but a book as an object. And the spreads and the frame of the book could kind of be like this window, this roving camera around this white world that all of them existed in, that you could kind of frame up these moments. And so there were no page numbers and no borders on the images, and it was just about looking into this vast white world. And then based on the success of that project, I was able to continue to make more projects with the same data and actually go out and collect more. So I was able to make a children's book. And so it was a different audience and a different entry point. So we were able to create these situations where there was a sense of reveal and an educational element to the project, where there was some sort of surprise on every page when they were learning and moving through the book. And it's gone on to do floor puzzles and a number of other things. When I was in China making the book itself, I was bored, like unbelievably bored. I'm sure anyone in here who's been on press, it's like the worst thing in the world. You sit in a room and wait and wait and wait. And so I was so bored, I went downstairs to the press room and I started making this video. And what was interesting about this was I was able to make a video to promote the work, but actually it wasn't about the work at all. It was sort of about how you make a book, which a lot of people had never seen. And it gave me another way to get people into the project. And this is actually what blogs became most interested in at the beginning, and the press sort of grabbed onto, was this little video, and then people were interested in the work because of that. But it was just another way into the project. And I'm always searching for different things for people to grab onto, different doorways. So while I was in China, I got a call from the person that had helped me publish Creature, and he was working with Archbishop Desmond Tutu on a book about elders. And he said, you know, we have this idea to go out and talk to 70 elders around the world about their perspectives, their wisdom, and we'd like you to take one of the portraits and maybe work with a journalist to do an interview. And I thought about it, and I said, you know, I wasn't really interested in doing one. I want to do the whole book. I want to do the whole project. Or, you know, I was addicted to the idea of completing a whole project. I had done a short film before Creature and a book that accompanied it, but I hadn't done sort of a holistic project. I really was searching for the next one, and I didn't want to waste time doing little bits of anything at that point. And so I got back to New York, and we talked, and I presented an idea to create a whole project about wisdom. And he had faith in the idea and in my abilities, which was a little crazy because at that point I'd never done portraits, really, and I'd certainly never interviewed anyone. So again, I went in, and the idea was pretty much the same, to remove all the context and create a singular environment for all of the people in the book. And so Wisdom became this book and a number of other outlets, and has gone on to do other things. The system we created to organize and collect the data was something that I created for this project, but have since refined and has become a big part of my process, which is my traveling studio, which I go everywhere with. Generally, my team is 4 of us, which is really small for what we do, actually. When I direct commercials or make big projects, it's 50, 60 people. When I create these films and books, it's 4 of us, and we have to get in and out of airplanes and in and out of cars and all over the world to go to the subjects, whether it's an animal or a person or whatever, to create these. And so this very refined, simple kit became what I developed to create the visuals for the project and the system that I was going to collect the data for the project with. And then because there was a human element and there were perspective, I needed to come up with a non-visual system as well to talk to everyone about. So it wasn't just randomly talking to everyone about their thoughts, but I could create a sort of way to get everyone's ideas into one place that were relatable. So it wasn't just their personal stories about life, but it was actually something that audiences would be interested in and could relate to. So I chose to speak to everyone about wisdom, love, work, the environment, and conflict resolution. And by speaking to every single subject in the project about the same thing, in the final product, you're able to find sort of patterns and perspectives that conflicted and sometimes were the same, and it became this fascinating, very relatable idea of breaking down these icons. We think of people like, Ted Kennedy, who I had photographed right before his stroke, right down the street from Congress. You can't really see it in the window, but he literally had left the floor from voting, came over, and then went back for another vote. And we had him right there. And then Esther Malango in the middle of Africa, who had no way to communicate with, who we just drove out to her house and knocked on the door and asked if she would do this project, who's a sort of matriarchal elder of this incredible, the Ndebele tribe, and which, as a side note, Massimo Vignelli did this extraordinary book in the 80s called Ndebele, all about this tribe that everyone should look into. A beautiful book. But it didn't put, because there was this white that sort of democratized the space, it didn't put Esther Malango and Ted Kennedy in any sort of different place. All of a sudden they became the same, and all of a sudden their ideas and their presence was completely equalized in the final product. Went on to photograph the only existing portrait in the last several years of Nelson Mandela, which was an extraordinary experience at his 90th birthday, down in South Africa as well. Andrew Wyeth, just before he passed. Vanessa Redgrave, Chuck Close, Judi Dench. And then came time after we went out and did this extraordinary year of collecting all this information, was time to do the book. And some of the text was long, some of the text was short, but we needed a way now to figure out how to create a hierarchy between the image and the word. And this is when I began interviewing in this project, which I knew nothing about. My first interview was with Michael Parkinson, who's like the Larry King of Europe. He's like the greatest interviewer in Europe. And so that was a little daunting. I'd never interviewed anyone, and I'm interviewing this guy. And he said to me, and I said, I've never interviewed anyone my whole life, and so be easy on me. And he said, oh, it's cool, we'll just have a conversation. Just, as long as you're interested, we'll have a great conversation. And that sort of taught me about this idea of needing to be totally curious about your subject. And if you're truly curious, you're going to unearth a sort of essence of them. But if you go in this route way with questions and sort of an idea of what you want, you're never going to get anything from the subject. And so by having these really phenomenal interviews and basically conversations with these subjects, I was able to create, from what I saw, these equivalences between the word and the portrait and then the video and the film. And I realized that this was kind of a dynamic portrait. This was a new way for me to look at portraiture. It wasn't just the single image. It was the true essence of that person recorded in multiple ways. And so I needed to create a hierarchy for the book. And this is when graphic design also plays such a phenomenal role in my work and my collaborations with the designer I work with, because you can create movement and poetic relationships between the word and the person. This is Dick Bruna, who developed the character Miffy, has published countless books on the subject, and he's one of the godfathers of minimalism. Miffy was the character that Hello Kitty and all these things were based on. He came out of Utrecht in Holland with Mondrian and Rietveld and all these extraordinary people. He's one of the true minimalists. And so one of the great things that he had said in the project was, if you put very few things on a page, you leave lots of room for the imagination. And so we're able to sort of create this poetic relationship between word and image. And when I look at just the left-hand page, even without the portrait, I still feel a sense of who Bruna is. And that went on with other things. So along with the book, we did our first sort of significant film that goes with these projects. This was an hour-long piece. I'll play a little bit of it for you.
Wisdom, to me, isn't an answer anyway. Wisdom is a question. It's like your mother saying, where have you been to this time of night? The question was the answer. She didn't want you to tell her. Wisdom is about experience, which hopefully would include risk-taking and being somewhat adventurous.
It is more blessed to give than to receive, because in giving, although it doesn't seem so, you receive.
You don't stop doing things because you get old. You get old because you stop doing things.
I get sillier as I get older, so I don't know what wisdom means.
It's awfully sad that with our clever brain, capable of taking us to the moon, we seem to have lost wisdom. And that's the wisdom of the indigenous people, who would make a major decision based on how will this decision affect our people 7 generations ahead.
So that goes on for a bit, but what was amazing about this project is, I'm sure many of you have watched the Sagmeister talk, Things I've Learned, which is this sort of amazing talk and book and project. Well, he learned those things on his own. A lot of what has affected me in my work, I learned just by hearing from other people, especially in this project. And that year of making this project had taught me so many things about how to work and how to balance work and life. And some of the things I wanted to just share with you were some of the quotes people had said. Massimo Levignelli spoke about the problem and understanding that in every project there's a problem. You hear this a lot in design, problems and solution. But one of the most significant things that stuck with me is you have to understand the problem. And in all these projects, we enter them not really knowing exactly what we're getting ourselves into, and unless we fully understand the project we're approaching, it's really, really hard to navigate. So I think about this all the time. You have to understand the problem you're approaching, and the only way to really successfully move through it and navigate it is to understand it. Redford talks a lot about independence and allowing that to remain true as an artist. And the more projects that I've done that are my own creative initiatives, the more opportunities I've had from brands to do work for them, and the more opportunities I've had to sort of leave my own practice to do things. And I think a lot about the idea of artistic freedom versus the idea of having to work for other people, and how you balance that, and how in the best scenarios you can remain independent even though you're sort of working for financial reasons. Chuck Close had one of the best quotes in the book. He said, "Inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work." I find it so often I'll be waiting for some sort of inspiration for something, and I think about what he said, and I realize that as soon as you just start getting to work, you realize you move through it, and inspiration's kind of a ridiculous idea, actually. You just get to work and things figure themselves out. And the last one is Garrett Fitzgerald said, "Above all, avoid cynicism." I think it's really easy for us all to be cynical about the work that we're doing, the work others are doing. And I've found in my own life that the more positive I am about the projects I'm in and the projects other people around me are doing, the better the work is. So I do try and avoid cynicism as much as possible. So after the books came out, the exhibitions began. This was at the Sydney Library, and this was another collaboration that I was able to have had many fruitful years with David Levin and Stella Betts, these architects who we worked together a lot. We decided to push the idea of the word and the image being an equivalent experience and engagement. And so throughout the museum, you would see people engaging with the walls and the words equally, and sometimes more than with the images. And it provided, I think, a more holistic experience. And then I was able to sort of bring the words out of the museum space and put them in unexpected places, like the mirrors in the bathrooms and benches and around town and stuff. The Wisdom exhibition then started traveling. It was in New York a few months ago, and it's on its way to LA. This was another great sort of entry point into into the work. And this was really exciting because it took place in the World Financial Center downtown. And this container, which housed all the work and brought it over from Australia, all the work got put out into this main public area where 3 million people walked through the space over the course of 3 weeks. People in their normal lives, not people sort of in the art ghetto, but people who work at American Express and tourists from Missouri who were going to look at downtown New York. Just everyone sort of passed through this space, which was really exciting. And then the container itself became the bookstore, the library, and a way for people to see things. So the whole show packs into this container, moves to the next city, lands, and it becomes this little kind of depot for the work, which is great. The next project after that was called Bird, and this is when I'd done Creature and I'd done Wisdom, and I was kind of thinking, what am I going to do next? And what I realized is that these kind of became these encyclopedic explorations of these subjects, and what I wanted to do was continue and delve deeper. And I had picked up Creature, and there was one image in there of a bird that I really loved, and I thought, I can keep going with this, and I can get more and more focused. And Creature and Wisdom served as these sort of master projects that I could fill out. Sorry, this fly. I could fill out with lots of other books and films and other things. So I decided that I would go back to an animal project. I was totally burnt out on Wisdom. It was a really tough kind of intellectual project, and I wanted to just do a more visual, artistic endeavor that was less head and more heart. And I went out and we made this book called Bird, which were also when I arrived at a place here that I wasn't sure why I was doing photography. I was making films, I was doing this interviewing thing an awful lot. I wasn't quite sure why we need photographs. I had my first kid, and when he goes through my phone, he just passes pictures and goes right for video. And I thought, we're at this place where the justification for photography is getting harder and harder to find. And then what happened with the birds is I realized, well, this is why we need photographs, because this is why I need photographs, because 15 years ago, it would have been very hard to make these images. Where technology's at with photography, with the speed at which you can shoot, lighting-wise, the number of ways that you can figure out a process with digital photography, and all of these different tools at hand now with photography allow us to make images like this. And birds being the perfect subject for me to explore, they move so quickly that you actually can't ever see them in this space unless you use this method of photography. And there had been this huge history of, sorry, this fly keeps flying right in my eye. There's this huge, there's a wealth of visual information on birds from Egyptian times to all the amazing work Audubon did. And I thought, I can now add something to that history by going out and documenting a number of species in this way. So I did about 100 in that first run, 100 different species. And like Creature, they were all sizes. That's a 10-foot wide American condor, and exists in the same space as this ferruginous hawk. And this is a great example of one of these moments where, because of the visual approach of collecting the data, we're actually able to draw a connection point and see a shared consciousness between the subject and me. And birds are just really beautiful. And also, they were being documented in a way. These Spix macaws there's a handful, literally, under 10 of these in the world living. I went to Qatar to photograph these in a private collection, and these, probably, had never been photographed before, and probably is the only existing imagery of this bird done in such high resolution. It sort of serves as a kind of two-dimensional taxidermy. So there's a preservationist quality to it, an artistic quality to it, this encyclopedic quality. So it was kind of infinitely interesting for me to do. And it's really hard to do just from a physical level. You kind of sit in this terribly, we were in the middle of the desert in Qatar, 115-degree weather. It's hot. You're in a terrible bird cage. You've got this white sheet. The bird's up in the corner. You're sort of waiting for hours and hours for the thing to come down. to grab the worm that you've left on the stick to get the moment where you're gonna be able to photograph it. And so it's like playing video games. It kind of becomes this addictive process of just trying to capture it. And it's that feeling where I'm sure everyone's felt this at some point. One of the great things about photography is you feel like you're taking something. You feel like almost like you've stolen something. You've taken something out of the world when you grab that image. And there's an addictive quality to taking pictures because you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting, you're looking, and then you find it and you grab it and then you own it. It's in your possession, the image, forever. And so it's one of the things that I find fantastic and infinitely interesting about photography. And then again, when David and I sat down to get to do the book, we were able to sort of look at this roving window, but then it became kind of this extraordinary crane because we could be up in the air, we could be moving around this huge space, sort of flying with the birds and become this new way of looking at birds. Every photograph that I'd seen of birds had been sort of looking up at the bottom of them, but never up and with them. I remember seeing this great film, Winged Migration, maybe 10 years ago or whatever, at the Paris Theater, and it was the first time you sort of got to fly with the birds. I thought about that a lot in this project, this looking at the subject in a new way. And then we built, for all my projects, I really like these ideas of these microsites. So you don't go to my website, but you go to the Bird's website. And that's the only thing that exists there on that site. And what was great about this particular website was that it became this growing list. So the 100 species that we started with were there, and then I was able to put their bird call and the information for them. So it became this sort of resource to look, and also a place where I could continue to put more and more and more images of the birds. Throughout that year of shooting bird, I was also doing more shoots for wisdom, and obviously more for creatures. So I sort of saw these projects as open-ended, and the game got a lot bigger because I realized it didn't stop just because a book came out or because it was a show. That sort of trailed. I could just keep going, and I could keep investigating, and as long as I was curious and had the energy to do it, I could keep these projects going. So after Bird, I decided to do music, which just came out a few weeks ago, which I'm very thankful for. I blogged about yesterday, where we decided within the vein of wisdom, I would go out and talk to 50 musicians about music, which seems ridiculous that you could actually ask musicians about music. I thought they're all going to laugh at me. That's why they play music, so I don't talk about it. But we actually had like 10 times as much text as we did in wisdom to deal with. Turns out musicians love to talk about music. So I decided to talk about these 5 themes to them that I thought could in some way deconstruct what music is all about and allow for a greater understanding of the medium, which I play music sometimes in an amateur way, and a lot of friends are musicians, but I had no idea what goes into it. It just seemed so foreign. It seemed something that I just didn't understand. So like in wisdom, like creature, like bird, these things are also sort of a personal, kind of self-indulgent thing for me. Because if I'm interested, I just get to go out and talk to these amazing people about it, and in a truly curious way, I get to ask them what it's all about. And the work seems to get better the more interested I am and the more honest I am about my approach to the projects. So what was exciting about this project was it wasn't just people over 65, like in wisdom. It was people of all ages and of all genres. And it really, the only criteria for the work was that they had sort of had made a significant impact on their genre, on music at large. Basically had something to say, had something to offer. Ornette Coleman to Ezra Koenig. So you had these, elders, and then you had these people just starting out. I think Ezra's the youngest one in the project. He's 25 from Vampire Weekend. Iggy Pop, Ian Mackay, one of my childhood sort of idols. And then, again, creating this hierarchy and this way of the text and the image working together.
Believe me or not, I've always had terrible, terrible stage fright. I always have. I don't know why. You'd think people would think, after all this time, you still got stage fright. But the only thing I liken that to, if you don't care, then you ain't going to last as long.
If I didn't have a record deal and a career like this, I'd be playing in a subway, in a club, somewhere, on the street, whatever. I just love creating.
To me, music, it is an addiction. It is just like the ecstasy of finding gems in the vast ocean.
Music is one of the most powerful tools in society. In the whole of society, music is the tool.
Of all the languages that human beings use to communicate with each other, it's the language which is the most elegant and the most universal.
So that also goes on. You can see that trailer on the website and in various places. But you can hopefully see in that short time the sense of intimacy and the idea that these aren't like the normal interviews these subjects have. Generally, when they're on television or when they're being interviewed for a magazine, they speak specifically about the project at hand. They're fulfilling the construct of the media outlet that they're in or the agenda of the network or whatever it is. But in this space, there's no agenda really. It's really just a collective group of perspectives. So they kind of let their guard down and we have these really intimate, generally intimate, amazing conversations that don't really exist in other places. And so these projects become beneficial for the subject as well as me and the audience that's seeing them. They usually kind of get up and go, oh, wow, that was great. I really love talking about that. I never get the time to talk about that. People never ask me those questions. So the project gets to exist outside of their normal routine of talking about things. And then, again, I build these websites for the project. And then because the iPad came out 6 months ago, I was able to do an iPad app that could create yet another entry point. Some people can't access a $50 book, so they can buy a $5 app and get into the project. And what was exciting about this, creating the project for another medium, was that I could create different information. So I was able to make a 5-minute film for each subject that could exist in the app. I was able to create text that you could organize by the theme. So if you just wanted to read the book because you're only interested in inspiration, you could just read it for that subject. And so these multiple entry points will keep coming up.
I had forgotten there was an interview, so I have no idea what we're talking about, but that's kind of fun.
And so I can find new ways to create places for people to engage with the work. So now I just sort of, I'm not sure what I'm going to do next. I have ideas for the next couple of books, but basically what I know is whether it's in these types of projects or in other creative endeavors that I have, I'm basically going to just keep working on these 3 steps, which is to evolve the concepts, to keep refining the systems for collecting the data, and to keep expanding the platforms that I can deliver it to people with. So that's it. Oh, sure. Well, I mean, sustainability is definitely a part of it. What the market can handle, and then how you decide what you're willing to lose money on because it feeds the other thing. Exhibitions don't do as well as maybe the book does, but one can feed the other. I don't know. 6 months ago, I didn't know there was going to be an iPad. And now there is, and I was already in the middle of shooting the project. So as they come up, and as I see that there's a way I can saturate that medium with the data, then I'm going to create for that. But what's most important is that the work gets to people. The work's not about me. It's not about me at all. It's about I'm the person that's driving the work from the subject to the audience. And so if that's my main mission, then I'm gonna just figure out the best car to do that with, basically, you know? And so sometimes it's gonna be a film and a book and an exhibition or an iPad, whatever it is, whatever the best way is, really. You know, none of them have really truly failed yet, so I haven't rejected any of them wholeheartedly, because I haven't done that many. And they're basically ones that have existed before me. I'm not creating new platforms. So, I don't know. It's a good question. Yeah. Aside from the brand work, which takes up 50% of my time, that's what funds all of this, you know. I have a studio and a great staff of and great collaborators that I work with, and I work really, really hard. I have 2 young kids. And I work. I don't really have much of a life outside of that, to be honest. Happily so. I want to get a lot done, and I feel like there's not that much time to do it. And I just want to make things. I love to make. I find more satisfaction out of making things than I do out of making anything else, making money, making social time. Making things gives me a great feeling. So I'm driven by that. I want to see what happens when they're done, and I want to see how far I can push things in as short amount of time as possible, basically. Yeah. Well, it depends. I do the photograph first, and then I do the interview. Generally, because I use the time in taking a portrait to kind of warm up. It's kind of like a pre-interview during that time. I'm not someone who takes a lot of frames. I have this little game in my head where I'm trying to do the least number of frames as possible. I try and do like 20 to 30 at most. As I think it just tires people out. It's usually in my first or second shot I have it. And then I switch over to the video. And the process is that there's a strobe on one end to make the picture, and there's a hot light on the other end. We just swing the stand around, swing the cameras around. So it's this really seamless process that goes from still to video. And then, it depends on what they'll give me. There's been interviews I've had for an hour and interviews I've had for 5 minutes. It totally depends on the subject. Kissinger gave me, 8 minutes or something. But then I drove downtown to Chuck Close's studio, and I had an hour with him, So it depends on the subject. And when I have very little time, I just try and get really focused. But I don't ask everyone the same questions. I have these themes that I want to hit, and I just try to engage with them and try and get to a point where we can just kind of snake through the themes rather than me saying, what's your ideas on the environment? You're not going to get anything, You have to sort of have a naturalistic way in, and then you get real ideas out of people. Yeah. It's like any conversation, Honestly, I don't have like a way, There's some questions. There's always, in every project, there's a couple of questions that come up that there's no other way of asking. Like in music, I was really interested in the idea of whether music comes from the artist or through the artist, this idea of channeling. And that concept of whether you feel like you own the work or whether you were just open enough for it to come through you, the genesis of the creation of the music. So that comes up. There are a couple questions, but generally I'm trying to really have a conversation, like what's happening right now. and then try and work that into the environment or work that into family or whatever it is, you know. Usually, you know, we'll show up somewhere and it's like we were in New York and then LA and then Australia and then London and then New York. I'm sorry, this fly is like ridiculous. And in, you know, 5 days. So you'll land and, oh, where are you coming from? The airport. Where were you before? You know, and then there's I try to be absolutely real. And then they feel comfortable and they can be real. No expectations is a big thing. I try to have no expectations from the subject. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just kidding. Yeah. It's an interesting question. You know, I'm really fortunate in that, and it's always been this way for some reason for me. Maybe not right in the beginning, but I do my own work, and then clients look at it and they say, well, that's interesting. We've got this going on. I wonder how you'd approach that. And so I never really have to check myself at the door and go to work. I get to kind of do my thing usually. And I find that my creative work, my own creative initiatives benefit the clients, and my time with the client benefits my creative initiatives. So it becomes seamless in a way. Visually, they don't always look the same, but they're all coming from me, and it's all sort of part of a journey. So I'm refining the way I'm approaching problems, the way I'm managing teams, the way I'm managing budgets and technical things. So no, I hope there are always companies that'll have me because it's interesting and I like doing it, and I wonder if my own projects will ever make enough money to actually make them. I doubt it, you know. We always kind of break even, but you know, the studio and the staff and all the stuff and all the stuff that's not directly a line item in a project have been built through brand work, you know. So brand work becomes kind of like my cushion in a way around me when I move through things. I like doing it. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, everyone has these rocks in their shoes and projects that don't quite get off the ground. None of the big projects. When I commit, and I have this friend that's always changing his mind once he starts a project. A month in, he's like, he doesn't like it, it's not good enough. And I always feel bad because the reality is that you have no idea. I hate every project 3 months in. I'm exhausted, I'm questioning whether it's good, I'm unhappy. That's just the process, and you have to get through that. And you have to commit. And once I make a commitment in a project, that's it. There's no pulling out. It has to work. And by forcing myself to commit to something, and all the rules I'm committing to, I mean, there's flexibility, and I'll change themes or change ideas, but pretty much I have to commit, and then it works out because I committed. When I think there's always failure when you sort of don't see it through fully. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah. Well, it's an interesting question. I have two companies. I have my own studio, and then I do have a partner who's here, Alex Flack in the back, who's my partner in another company where we do other projects. Alex directed a film called Still Bill on Bill Withers, a feature last year, which I produced with him, and We also did a short film that was at Sundance in 2007 called High Falls. So we've done a lot of our own projects together, and that's a company where we can do collaborative work together. And then I have my own studio where various people work in very focused ways. I don't know. I'm learning, how to do that. I've had good experiences and bad. There's a couple of people that work with me that have worked with me since the beginning, and they have a lot of freedom. They have a lot of power in the work. I think that people have to own their contributions, and that seems to be, that's the best way I can answer the question, that as long as someone owns their contribution, they're going to give it, a lot.